Retired?
Oh my God, I'm more busy than I was when I was working 50 hours a week, you know.
It's because we allow ourselves to do more than we do.
Yeah, and then and you're 1 in 10 that does something, so then you get the other 9's workload.
Yeah, trying to get going on vacation and trying to get everything done. And I didn't realize I'm having this tea December 4th. I'm gone Sunday until the 30th, so I have 4 days afterwards to get everything ready for the tea. But they're selling the tickets in the office, and I'm going to push him to push.
You know, you didn't put a time on that?
It's on the ticket?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's 12 to 2. I mean, that's in the whole ad, so. Sorry.
Yeah.
Where are you going on vacation?
Well, my sister's coming down tomorrow. We're going on a cruise, and then we're coming back, taking all the cruise clothes out of my suitcase and put all my winter clothes in and going to Chicago.
Oh, goodness gracious. That sounds hectic.
It sounds fun.
It does sound fun.
Yeah.
It's always fun to travel. Always fun. My daughter and I have been trying to go to Europe since COVID. We had a trip planned, obviously got canceled. The trip, when did it all start? 20? Got canceled. Got canceled. Then we were going to do it this summer, and we're like, can't do it this summer. Then we were like, look, next summer. Then we're like, oh, maybe not yet. Let's give it a beat.
Sarah asked me to start looking into trips for Europe for the church for next year.
For like the 20...
2022.
So with the Office of Schools, they've said we're not doing any international travel until possibly next school year.
2022.
Let's see, this is 2022, 21, 22, so 22, 23. That's the soonest we'd be allowed to do international. But parishes and schools don't always do the same thing, but I think it's just out of an abundance of caution. Because you know what we were talking about? What if you get to France with a group of kids and somebody gets COVID? So then this kid gets quarantined and they're in France, right? So we're just like, oh, yeah, no, we're going to wait. We're good? Good to go? All right, yeah.
But ours would be in July because that was and we have to find a dog sitter for who.
Oh, yeah, 2023, I think that's when Hannah and I are going to go. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our last session. We're going to be talking about Buddhism tonight. Do we have any special intentions? Okay. All right. She just says she has a special intention she doesn't want to mention aloud. Okay. Anybody else? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. People getting back into the groove of life is very, very, very hard. Let's keep our veterans as we celebrate Veterans Day this Thursday and Thanksgiving for their service. Is anybody in here a veteran? Yeah, thank you for their service and commitment and willingness to sacrifice that way. So, anything else? All right, in the spirit of Buddhism, we're going to spend a minute in silence tonight. So if we just want to center ourselves and open ourselves up to God's wisdom and peace. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so let's get into it. Buddhism. What do you guys know about Buddhism?
The only thing I know is that after we retired, my husband and I volunteered out at the Y of the Rockies, and some of the Buddhists would come out for conferences, and their secretary had told me that when she started working for them, they told her that if the phone rang, wait till the fifth ring, settle yourself, be comfortable before you pick up the phone, be in the right place. So they were always about, and they always had the cafeteria became their place, and they had the big gong there to remind people to be silent and to meditate while they were eating. But they were lovely people to have on campus.
So it was just always about kind of like centering yourself and being ready for whatever's going to come. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Hello? Anybody else? Buddhism? Anything?
The Dalai Lama, and in this Myanmar, they're trying to expel the Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
In Bangladesh, borders that, there's an issue there.
Mm-hmm. So is,
This, you know, this I don't understand.
Yeah.
Because they are so, normally so,
their tenets are so peaceful that when we see this kind of behavior, it seems so hypocritical. I mean, even like the Buddhists who do the what's it called, immolation, when you set yourself on fire. Am I saying that correctly? What is it? Immolation. And as a protest, like I know we've all seen that, where they're protesting in China and different places, and like it's so counterintuitive to what they're. But again, you know, we've been saying this from the very beginning. In every religious tradition, you have people on every spectrum of the extremes to the most, you know, liberal, and people interpret these teachings and think that, you know, what they're doing is a practice that would be honored by the tradition, and sometimes it just looks from the outside to not really match what's really happening. There's a reason that many people think religion is hypocrisy, because they see the snippets. It's true of every religious tradition, right? And they don't really know the depth and the beauty that comes with the religious tradition. So anything else on Buddhism? All right, so let's kind of crack into this a little bit. I have a couple great videos for you tonight that are actually embedded, so we get to watch them. So let's just talk about the fast facts, kind of the foundations of where we understand Buddhism to come from. So here we see this language of Sanskrit again, and the word Buddhai means to wake up, and this is where the name of this tradition comes from, Buddhism. We're going to see that the Buddha was considered to be the enlightened one. So it's this idea of being woken up. So what do you think maybe that they want us to wake up to? What are we trying to be awakened to? You have any guess before we move any further? Okay, to a higher power.
one earth, one people.
Okay, so oneness with the earth and with other people. Okay. Yeah, awareness of self is a big one. It's all of those. It's all of the above, but it really talks about this sense of awareness of who we are and our place in the world is a big part of it. So let's look. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you will see that within the Buddhist tradition, we're going to see a lot of aesthetical thinking that we have within our Christian tradition, and this idea of coming to this awareness that only within this awareness of self can we really fully be open up to the awareness of who God is in our lives. But the Buddhists talk about it slightly differently than that. So it is a religion that is more than 2,500 years old. Again, there is nobody who would say, Buddhists would say that the religion is started with the Buddha, but they would say again that this was an awakening time, and just like other religions, that this stuff, it pre-exists our awareness of it, okay? So when we date it, we talk about like the formalization of it. We have two main branches of Buddhism, and then we're going to see the Tibetan monks will be a little bit different, but these are the two main branches, Theravada and Mahayana. And it is mostly centered in Asia, but it's actually growing pretty steadily. The most current statistics that I was able to find for 2020 are that 8 to 10% of the world's population consider themselves Buddhists. Now, when people consider themselves something, that doesn't mean that they always practice it in the fullest sense of the word, but people would identify as such. So 535 million people, not a bad little number there. So this kind of gives you a sense of, I know you probably can't see the small print up here, but what we're looking for is the maroon shading is where the vast majority of Buddhists would reside in the world. So that just kind of gives you a sense. You can see that it is not widely spread out throughout the whole world. There might be pockets here and again, but the majority reside in very specific parts of Asia. I don't know that Buddhists are concerned with evangelization in any way. They do not, their objective is not to make the whole world Buddhist, like some evangelical Christians would say that that's their whole reason to exist. Some Muslims would say that they are supposed to evangelize and convert people to Islam. The Buddhists would not have that as anything that would matter in one way or another to them. Buddhist is very self-driven. It's very much about self. And when I say that, hello, it's not about self like selfish. It's about self-awareness, which will then connect them to the whole world in a bigger way. So evangelizing is not a concern. So the founder of Buddhism is Siddhartha Guatma. He wasn't a Hindu, all right? And he comes from the warrior caste. We saw our caste system last week. And interestingly enough, he is quite different than some other founders of religious traditions because he was actually quite wealthy. He was a prince. And he renounced everything that was rightfully his in his caste of this Hindu system that he was born. So Buddha, as I said, means the awakened one. And basically, his idea was that he had himself become awakened, and he had done so because of his dispensing of the material wealth that he believed was tying him down to the earth. He spent time in meditation, and through the time that he spent in meditation, he became enlightened, and he believed if people followed his lead, they too could be enlightened. So he didn't run around saying, you have to do this, you have to come to my church, we pray this way. He just basically said, if you follow this simple pathway, which we're going to look at this pathway of Buddhism, you too will be enlightened, and that's the objective of being a human, is to be enlightened, and then to get released from this life. He is not considered a god. He is not considered a messenger. He is just considered a human person that was enlightened in such a way and able to teach people this pathway to enlightenment that people began to honor him and follow him and listen to his teachings and try to live by the pathway that he set forward. So nobody would ever call Buddha a god, although I do believe many people do think that he is considered a god. He is not. And he also, for whatever reason, is always shown with a big fat belly, right? Whenever you see the statues of the Buddha, he's always got a big fat belly, but that is not historically accurate. I don't know where that idea comes from and why people make statues of him like that. So he was born into wealth. He was a prince, and he was traveling. And while he was traveling, the way that history talks about this is that he came upon what are called the 4 sights. Now, these become essential to his own personal enlightenment, okay? So the first sight he sees is an old man. The second sight he sees is a diseased man. Thirdly, he sees a corpse. And fourthly, he sees a wandering holy man without any possessions. Okay, so now I'm going to quiz you. What do you think these 4 sights mean? What do they mean? And then taken as a whole, what do you think they mean? Anybody? They're the stages of man. So when we see an old man, a diseased man, a corpse, and then a wandering holy man. So you think those are like life stages that he's seeing?
I hope they're life stages.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Ideas? Okay. Any other ideas?
Because that would mean that there is a life afterwards, because after the corpse, then you're a saint or you're out there as a holy person.
Okay. So, all right. Okay. I hear that. Yep. An attachment to nothing. Interesting. So there's no attachment. So an old man, a diseased man, and a corpse, and a holy man would have no attachments. Okay, they're losing everything. So they themselves might be attached, but it's a vision of loss. Oh, okay. I like that. Anything else? Okay, it represents humanity. So he totally, completely gives up everything that he was familiar with and everything that he knew because of this experience of seeing these sights, okay, as he's traveling. So I gotta say, I get the sense that he's finally coming to terms with the fact that this body is temporary. Like all of that is like stages of how you are. I think we said the stages of life, but they really talk about how we're aging out of life, right? And I mean, when I turned 60, this is my year. Like I think like this now. I think like, yeah, I'm almost done with this. So I hope I live another 20 years. I keep thinking maybe I won't live another 20 years. You know, when you're 30, you think life is never going to end, right? It's funny, but yeah, kind of this like, okay, so we have this old man, this idea that we are going to age out of this body, right? A diseased man, we don't know how old the diseased man is. So again, it's the sense that this body, this corporal body is temporary. It can fall ill. It's not 100% perfect, right? A corpse, we start talking about the idea that now we are reckoning with the idea that the body no longer functions and it's dead. And then the wandering holy man. So like that, I find that one the most interesting because the 3 are like definitely stages of life. Like the realization this is just a shell, right? But then we got the wandering holy man. So I don't know. I think that one's a little bit like, maybe there's another side I need to explore that is not the corporal body, right? That is not this biology, but that there's something more to us than the biology. Nonetheless, these are the 4 sites that he comes across while he's traveling, and he has such a huge impact. And at 29, so that's the difference between him and I. I had to wait till 60, and at 29, this dude's like, I'm gonna change it up. And he decides he is going to leave his family. He's going to leave all the wealth that his family is promising him. And he is going to live as an ascetic. So he's going to go out into the wilderness. He is going to live this quiet life of solitude. And he is going to meditate and spend his time doing that. So he sits under the Bodhi tree. And this is actually a tree that you would find. It's considered a sacred tree. It's a fig tree. And while he is spending his time in meditation, he continues to become more and more and more enlightened. And as his enlightenment becomes so transformative, he begins to talk about it, and he teaches his followers that they too should live this life of simplicity and meditation and detachment. And that's probably one of the most important words in Buddhism is the word detachment. And he wants them to also live this life. And he then becomes known as the Buddha. And that's his origin story. And that's the origin story of how this religion becomes part of our history and culture. Now, some Buddhists would not consider Buddhism a religion. They would consider it a philosophy. Many people would consider it a philosophy as opposed to a religion, and that you have no formal obligations. It is a way of life that you live as opposed to ritualistic practices that you do. And so, does it fall into the definition of religion? You could probably fall either way on that one, right? Because religion has to have certain tenets for it to be called a religion. It could be. The holy man, Kathy said the holy man without possessions gave him this idea. It could be. Yeah. I think about this idea that, so I'm going to, at this very young age, I'm going to leave everything that I know and every comfort that I have, and I'm going to meditate. I mean, I can't get the kids to meditate for 5 minutes, right? And he's going to just give everything away, and he's going to meditate. And honestly, if you have ever done any reading or studying on the power of meditation, it's truly one of the most powerful things we can access in our own personal faith journey, is this idea to be still and be silent and not allow the distractions of the world to interfere with this possible connection and conversation that we could be having with God. And it is one of the ways people say that people gain peace, where people gain a sense of comfort, a sense of oneness with God, and it causes people to be able to control anxiety. I mean, there's so many good things that happen during meditation. He was ahead of the game at 29, where he was able to slow down. Because if you think about a 29-year-old in the world today, in the United States today, well, he didn't care. So he was not worried about where he was basically saying, no, he separated himself from everything, and he was just living. He would eat what people gave him, or he would eat from the trees. He just basically went off the grid.
Yeah, but if you have all these people doing that,
What kind of a world do we have? Yeah. Well, that is true. You would have, if you had a world full of aesthetics, right, you don't have much innovation, you don't have much, but I bet you it would be a lot calmer place to live. Yeah. Yeah. How do they? Well, I actually think there's evidence of that in our world today. I think that when we human people have one thing in common. We are all searching. Okay? We have the same questions, all humans. People might not own up to the fact that they have these questions, but we all have the same questions. What is our purpose? Why were we born? Why are we here? What happens to us when we die? Is there something after this life? We all have these questions. So we are seekers. That is in our very human nature. Now, some people choose to say, I'm not a seeker. There ain't nothing. This is just a body. This is just all a cosmic joke. I'm going to die and I'm going to just go back to the earth. That's how some people answer that question. But the majority of the world seeks answers, okay? Now, if you have somebody, and we do this in the modern world, we've got all kinds of people that come to the forefront as very well-known televangelists and preachers, churches that grow huge congregations because of one minister who happens to be so charismatic that they draw these crowds in. People want to find answers. And so even though in our context of the world, he might look like a crackpot because he's off sitting under a tree praying all day long, we don't say that about our people who are living in monasteries, who are living in silence, right? But people said it about Jesus, people said it about Buddha, people said it about Martin Luther King, even modern day prophets, people said this, that they're crackpots. But there is something to the fact that we could today do something, and if it was charismatic and attractive enough, we would have our own following. Because we see it still happening today. People are looking for answers. Life doesn't make sense. Some people like black and white answers. You just give me the rules to live by. That's one of the attractions of Islam. We have these five things we have to do in the 5 pillars. We do them. They're very clear cut. We like that. Orthodox Jews, these are all the rules. Stay in the box, follow the rules. Some people like over here are more like, kind of like outside the box. That would be a Buddhist. We want to just see what this all means. We want to be enlightened by this. We don't limit ourselves. We don't tie ourselves down in any way. So there's something out there for everybody, and there are enough people in the world still today seeking that it makes sense to follow people in these ways. Now, whether or not they are legitimate, that only time can tell. One of the things with the religions that we've talked about in here is they are hundreds and hundreds of years old, and there's a reason that they are, because there is some truth to be found within them. The things that don't contain that kind of truth, they usually don't have a lifespan that legitimate religions have. Okay, so now we have our Buddha. So in the most basic terms, Buddhism is very human-centered, right? So the responsibility for Buddhism lies within the individual. So my own spiritual development relies on me. It does not rely on somebody telling me. It does not rely on a priest telling me, or a preacher telling me, or a group of tenets that I have to follow, like the 10 Commandments. Basically, it is all based on the individual. And the whole purpose is to become enlightened. Now, what does enlightenment mean? Enlightenment might be defined differently by different people, but for Buddhism, it would say enlightenment is that you are so in tune with the other that you can transform yourself. You can leave all of this earthly desire and earthly attachment behind, and you can transform yourself into a being that will ultimately just simply disappear into the other. So their whole object is to disappear. They don't have an object like we would say, well, I hope when I die I go to heaven and I'm with God and it's beautiful and happy and I'm filled with joy. I have a picture of that in my head. What does that feel like? The most joyful thing that I've ever experienced is better than that. They do not have that imagery. Their imagery is that they extinguish. That's the word they like to use. And that's the ultimate reality, is that you have lived this life that has been so deeply enlightened that you don't need to exist anymore, and you become part of everything else. You just extinguish into and become part of everything else. I don't like the ending. I'm not crazy about the ending in Buddhism. I like some of the other endings better. But everybody's different, right? Maybe this is a higher spirituality that I'm able to obtain. So they would say that the way that you become enlightened is that you obtain nirvana. Nirvana is a term that kind of gets thrown around in different ways, and there's a rock band named Nirvana. But this is a Buddhist term, and basically, as I said, this term means to extinguish or to blow out. So your whole objective is to eventually get to a place where you no longer need to exist, and you are extinguished in any way that you are attached in the life cycle. So if you achieve nirvana, you become part of the flowers and the animals and the other humans and the atmosphere, and it's like you become particles that join in the energy. So that's going to be the best way to describe it, is any energy. Now we say energy can neither be created nor destroyed, right? Isn't that the one thing in physics that I know, is that we're told energy can neither be created or destroyed, right? It just is. And so what a Buddhist would say is this is one form of energy that we want to separate ourselves from so that our energy will join all other energy, and that's the highest form of enlightenment. That we're so enlightened we don't even need to exist anymore.
Seems like you almost have to get into a trance and just, you're in your own world.
Meditation can be like that. Now they do say, we're going to see that they actually talk about like this is the pathway to enlightenment. They're going to like give you some steps or pointers, so to speak. But that ultimately it's not like you're walking in a trance. It's like you are informing your consciousness at such a high level that that's taking you to a different understanding of existence. So it's not like you're just always quietly meditating, but that's going to lead you to a path that will take you to this higher level of existence. So let's look at the pathways, and then maybe it'll make better sense, okay? Because it is very different than the way we think as Christians. It's very different in some ways, in many ways, all right? So let's look at, well, let's just finish with him, and then we'll get into his teachings. So he died at the age of 80. He lived to be quite an elderly man, and they think he died from food poisoning. And then what happens was he was cremated. And when he was cremated, they took some of his ashes, and they spread these ashes around in places that had been important to the Buddha, or places where he had a large following, or had some kind of a special revelation. And when they distributed these ashes, over top of these ashes, they built stupas. And stupas are what we would call a temple or a church. Basically, it is some kind of a monument that was built in honor of the Buddha, and these then became places of pilgrimage. So they took some ashes here and some ashes there and some ashes here, and they built these stupas. Now, in the modern world, it's not like they would never build another temple. There are Buddhist temples all over the world. But these stupas are the original, and they are the most significant when there is a connection to his death and this place and his ashes being laid in this particular area. So these are just some images of a couple stupas. You can see the first one is quite old, and the second one is a much more modern Buddhist temple. And so then what happens is they begin to preserve his teachings. Now again, his teachings were passed down orally, which we have seen every single religious tradition we looked at started first with an oral tradition, as did he. And then he had the 4 councils of his followers. And again, now we have 2 branches. Well, we have more than 2 now, but 2 original branches of Buddhism. And again, why do we have different branches of the same religious tradition? Because people don't all agree, and this group does it better than this group, so we're just going to do it this way, and you go ahead and do it that way, and we'll all be Buddhists, but we'll be different kinds of Buddhists. And again, it's the same as why we have different branches of every single religious tradition that we talk about. So his teachings become known as Dharma. Okay? Yes? Yes. So one of the tenets of Buddhism is that you can't capture God in any one religious tradition, and that we all have a way of enlightening one another through our teachings and through our practices, and that Buddhism is certainly something that if we practiced meditation and practiced some of the teachings of the Buddha, that we would be better Catholics, better Jews, better Hindus. We would all be better people, but that they would never say, you can only be Buddhist, and that's how you capture God. They would say Buddhism can inform and enlighten anybody, even if they practice other religious traditions. So some of the ways that Buddha's, some of the teachings of Buddha, and certainly some of the ways that Buddhists live, are actually a beautiful layer that can be added over any religious tradition and would certainly enhance anybody's faith tradition. So when we look at them, you're going to see that they're really beautiful teachings. They're really gentle, peaceful ways to be in the world. So I think that answered her question. Can she give us a thumbs up? Okay, tell her to give us a thumbs up, and if not, to ask again. All right, thank you. So then Buddhism begins to spread, and then, of course, as I said, we have disputes over the original teachings, which bring us to our two modern sects of Buddhism. And then we have the Tantric Buddhism, which is going to emerge in Tibet, which is another offshoot of the Mahayana Buddhism. And we're going to look a little bit at the Tibetan Buddhism, because this is where we meet the Dalai Lama, who is probably the most famous of all Buddhists in the world, okay? So that's basically how Buddhism ends up becoming what it is today. So what we'll do now is we'll look at some of the sacred stories and scriptures that they have. So they, as I said, were handed down, and eventually what becomes contextualized, there's some different types of scriptures, but the most famous are called the Tripitaka, or also it can be referred to as the Pali Canon. And this is the most famous compilation of scriptures in Buddhism. And they are really considered to be the Buddha's words. But we'll see, we're going to look at some different parts of it, written down basically in the 1st century CE. So when the New Testament Christian scriptures were being written down, this is kind of a contemporary act that was happening within Buddhism, where the Buddhist scriptures were starting to be written down. So the Tripitaka contains the following sections. And again, you can see when we looked at other traditions, all of the scriptures have kind of the same kind of groupings, right? There's ways to practice it. There's rules that we live by. There's the wisdom of the leader or the wisdom of the community, right? And this is no different. So we have the Vinayana Pitaka. And so this is basically tells the priests, the Buddhist priests and the Buddhist nuns, how they're supposed to live in the world. So it gives them directives. It also talks about how they're supposed to interact with each other to make sure that everything's on the up and the up. And then it talks about what you're supposed to do when you chant. So there are ritualistic practices like the chanting and the way that we pray together and the way that we meditate and some of the practices of meditation. But it's not as, I guess I want to say it's not as, maybe I want to say liturgical as something like a Catholic Mass, right? It's much more like just a way of praying together that's very free, but that there are certain words and certain sounds that we make and the ways that we chant together. So this gives direction to that. And then we have the Suta Pitaka. So this is some of the Buddha's teachings and some of his sermons that were delivered. These are considered to be very, very important. And then you can see that's broken down even further. And so it will talk about like what the Buddha said that you need to do and how you live your life and some of his most famous sermons. And then we have a word I'm not going to even try to say, Pitaka, and this is really when you start to get into the philosophy of Buddhism. The, kind of like this is really the higher nature of Buddhism, and how you live your life and why we even live our lives. And then we have in some parts of Buddhism, We have the Mahayana Sutras, and these are written later and not respected by all Buddhists as really part of their canon because they don't consider them to be original, that they emerged later, and they wouldn't necessarily attribute them directly to the Buddha. Okay? So when they talk, well, we'll talk about meditation a little bit in a minute. So we'll talk about when I said that there were certain chants and things. We'll talk about that in another minute. So now this is where we get to like, what does it really mean to practice Buddhism, right? And so we're going to break it down here when we talk about the fact that they have something in their tradition called the Four Noble Truths. And this is really the heart of all of Buddhism. And what happens is these lead to, now this is, for a minute this is going to sound confusing, and I apologize, but it'll be made clear as we continue to go through this. I've never found a better way to explain this, so just bear with me for a minute. So we have the Four Noble Truths. So those are like the highest, if we talk about a hierarchy of what we need to do, that Four Noble Truths are up here. And when you practice those, what's going to happen is they're going to lead you to what's called the middle way or the middle path, and there's an eightfold pathway. So the Four Noble Truths, you practice these, then they lead you to this eightfold pathway or the middle way, and this middle way is kind of a way of existing, a way of being in the world. And the only way you can get here is if you're following these Four Noble Truths, okay? And so the middle way then is going to lead you out of the cycle of life and rebirth because they are believers in reincarnation. So they do believe in reincarnation. Buddhist reincarnation would have no problem believing that all living things, so anything with a heartbeat, any kind of a tree, these are all part of the other, and so that there is life in all of these. So like they would even go to the point of saying that you shouldn't even kill a bug because that bug might be your cousin. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but that anything with a beating heart, anything that's alive is not to be harmed in any way because it is as significant as a human person. They would not believe that there's a hierarchy of that humans are the highest form of creation. They would say that they are one form of creation, but that all things that are alive are significant and important. So then you get to this idea, well then they're vegetarians, which they are if they're practicing Buddhism in its formal sense. But then you have to kill a plant to eat a plant, right? So then you get into this like, what's the difference between plant life and animal life? And it's a hard thing to like really understand that there's, they'll say, well, the plant can regenerate, an animal cannot regenerate itself. So there's, because plants are one of the things that naturally regenerate, right? Not the corn you're eating, but you could take, the droppings from flowers. You can take, things that you can regrow and regenerate. And so that probably would be the only thing. I mean, obviously we have to sustain, people have to eat. So you have to eat something, but a fruit tree, you're not killing the tree, you're taking the fruit from the tree and the tree will regenerate itself. So that's probably the most distinct thing they would say as to why certain things are good and right and then other things are not good and right. So they wouldn't even want to kill an ant if they could avoid that. I have to say, knowing the little bit I know about Buddhism, sometimes I feel like I'm dangerous because I know just enough. And I think even when if I got a roach in my house, I don't want it there. I don't want it there. And it's hard to get a roach out of your house without killing it. You can't really scoot it along. I mean, I'll pick up a chameleon and I'll throw a chameleon outside unless my cat gets it first. But I'm not going for a roach. I'm going to swat the roach and kill it if I can. And I honestly, truly, I think every time that I kill something, like there'll be ants and I'll be spraying the ants, like, I don't want you in my house. I'm sorry, dude. You just picked the wrong house, right? And I'll be killing them. And I honestly think I'm stopping something's heart from beating. Like I think about, like it literally kind of gives me a little bit of a pit in my stomach that I am taking this living thing and I am stopping its heart from beating, and it really bothers me. I think that's my Buddhist side of me, because it really does bother me. It doesn't stop me all the time, but it bothers me. I don't know if that gets you any points or not, but you hear it, God? I'm hoping it gets me some points, right?
Science fiction thing that the universe, humans may not be B-rates, the top of the line.
Okay.
So that's the same thing that Roach.
Yeah, is in this kind of succession of importance, but we make that power grid. Yeah, did you ever watch The Twilight Zone? The Twilight Zone does all that kind of stuff, right? It freaks me out. That Twilight Zone episode, did you ever watch that episode where there's a couple that gets on a train, and they're on a train and they go through the city and they travel and then they stop and they get to the train station. It's the same train station they got on in the first place, and then they're like confused, so they stay on the train. It does it again, and it does this, and they keep stopping at the same train station. And then when you see the end of the Twilight Zone, it like backs up the camera, and there's a girl, and she's looking down, and they're in her play train thing, and I think to myself, oh my God. It is so creepy, the things people think up as possibilities. So we divert a little bit here, but so anyway, so you want to get released. You don't want to maintain an attachment to anything, including this physical being. So you want to get released from this cycle. And so but why they call it the middle way, and this is another nice thing about Buddhism. Buddhism really talks about having balance, right? They say that the way that you are going to achieve the middle way is not by extreme ascetical life, and it's not by extreme indulgence, but it's by balance in your life and understanding that there's a time and a place for everything, that you can enjoy certain things, but you should not overindulge, and you should spend time in this quiet, aesthetic way of life, but you can also live in the world. It's not about what we do, it's about how attached we are. And I think that has a real ring of truth to it in Christianity. You think about the story in the Gospel of Jesus and the rich young man, and the rich young man says, what am I supposed to do to follow you? And Jesus says, follow my commandments. And he says, I do that already. And he says, then sell everything you have and follow me. And the guy's like, well, I don't know if that's such a good idea, right? And that whole story talks to us about attachment. You know, like, I have wonderful things in my life. Are they more important than my relationship with God and my enlightenment, is what a Buddhist would say, right? So that is a very similar way of thinking. Sorry, I had a very salty dinner. So this is what we want to get to, is the middle way. So these are the Four Noble Truths. The first one is life is suffering. Do you love it? Do you love it? It's just so blatant. Life is suffering. And this is probably what was revealed to him when he saw the old man and the corpse, right? He looked around and he said, this is not an easy thing to do, that there is suffering. And when we recognize that life is suffering, we have some power over it. Right? So people can say, oh, life is so hard, I hate, I don't know what to. But what the Buddha would say is that you embrace suffering, you recognize it as a reality, and the Buddha would also say we have control because we bring about much of our own suffering. So he's saying the very nature of human existence is painful. Physically pain, we're going to have physical pain, we're going to have emotional pain, we're going to have spiritual pain. And is this not true, right? And so he says what happens is that even death is not going to bring an end to our suffering, because guess what, folks? Unless we're fully, completely enlightened and we've reached moksha, we're going to be reborn and we're going to enter into this cycle of suffering again. So all of life is suffering. It's kind of glass half empty type of a theory in the world, but there is some truth to it, right? There's nothing easy about being human. There are wonderful, joyful, exciting moments, but just think about how much pain we endure too, day to day, long term, short term. He's on to something here, right? We just don't like to be that blatantly, stated that way. But then he says, the cause of suffering is human desire and attachment. So again, he's saying that we have control over it because we are selfish. We crave things. We want too much. And because we want these things, we can cause our own suffering. So basically, this is the idea. I would like to stop my pain. So in order to stop my pain, I'm going to start drinking. And so then when I start drinking, I bring on even more pain and more suffering, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. And the reason that I do that is because I am not enlightened. I am too attached. If I were not allowing my pain to control me, if I was trying to just accept that this is part of my reality and not trying to stop it and squelch it down and swallow it, then I would not bring about other suffering that I'm trying to stop this pain. Does that make sense? It's very psychologically sound, right, when you look at it the way he teaches it. And he says even when we get what we want, it's impermanent. So do you think about that? Like, I think about that all the time too. I'm just like, I'm in a hot tub and I'm just like, this is so comfortable. I'm so lucky that I have hot water. It's such a blessing. And then I get out and then I'm freezing. I'm just like, oh, why did I get in that hot tub, right? So it's true, right? We have this impermanence about everything, even the suffering, the pain, the suffering, but so too the joy and all of that. This is very kind of in keeping with our own personal Christian theology is, we talk about the suffering of the cross, we talk about the impermanence of our physical body, so it's not that out of line here. He talks about it in a very different way, though, that says this is how you begin to understand and become enlightened. So then he says, in order to cease suffering, we have to cease desiring. So we just have to not want anything other than what we already have. And when we can do this, when we are completely satisfied with everything in our life, and we are not desiring more and more and more, then we are on our way. And this is how we're going to break the cycle, and this is how we're going to achieve nirvana. So to say that I am perfectly satisfied with everything, I can't say that. I still want to lose more weight, and I still want to travel, and I still want to eat and not gain weight, and I still have all these desires, so I'm not a very good Buddhist, even though I don't want to kill things. So this is kind of the idea of how this works. And then finally, what he says is when you follow this particular middle way or the Eightfold Path, that is when you are going to understand that you can cease these desires and you can stop being attached to things. And so the Eightfold Path is, and I want you to think about Christianity when you hear these: right understanding, right thought, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right alertness, and right concentration. Now, if we were able to do all of those things well, you could see what kind of, even detach this from Buddhism. If you knew a person that could do all of those things and do them well and stay in that space all the time, like what kind of an amazing person would that be, right? A saint, almost not human, and that's why what Buddhism would say, you have to go through many cycles to get higher and higher and higher and higher on this journey to this complete enlightenment. But you can see that these are wonderful traits. They're wonderful traits that any human, even having one or two of them, would be a pretty solid human, right? And so you can see the beauty of his thinking. Now, I look at people like the Dalai Lama, and I do think, from what I've seen, from the way he presents, he does seem to be higher up there in this stuff, the way he talks and the way he presents and the way he treats people. He seems to be, more developed on this pathway than I certainly am, right? So you can see that there are people that seem to have kind of gotten it. Again, we might call them old souls. It gets back to this idea of reincarnation again, but, this idea of an old soul. That some people are born old almost, and they are so calm and they're so peace-filled. So that's what the Eightfold Pathway is. So they say the way that you can work your way to the middle way, or the Eightfold Path, is by doing these three main practices. The first one is living a moral life. The second one is by meditating. And the third one is by becoming wise. Now, basically, they would say you can't separate any of these practices from any of the other practices, that this is a cyclical way of being in the world, so that your moral action is going to bring about meditation, your meditative behavior is going to bring about wisdom, and then your wisdom is going to give rise to good actions. So they're all completely interrelated. You can't separate them out. And so this is how you live day to day so that you can get here and become more fully on the Eightfold Pathway that will help cease the suffering and will cause you to stop desiring, which will then release you from this life. So you see how it all fits together, finally. I can. You want me to go to that one? Yeah, I backed up for a minute. I just wanted to get it connected to that. Say that to me again.
The reason maybe they haven't evangelized is because we don't want their teaching, because we are such consumers. We want everything.
Oh, I see. So our consumerism, our desires, keep us from not wanting this thing that Buddhism is dealing out. It could be.
They can't evangelize because we aren't listening.
It could be that they're just showing us and we're just not even accessing it because we like our creature comforts too much. Could be. I mean, we talk about this same type of thing in Christianity, that we have to be detached, we have to be able to give away everything, and, we should, people in need, Jesus tells us, give them our coat, give them, everything. But, we don't access that particular part of the message as much as some other parts of the message, I think. Unless you're with Father Phil, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some branches of Christianity are all about, we talk about prosperity, the prosperity gospel, where they preach the exact opposite. The reason you're rich is because you did the right, Jesus likes you better, and you did the right things, you're a better Christian, which is, to me, quite a distortion of the Gospels, but yeah. Okay, so now these are the 5 precepts of morality. So they do have kind of like a code. And remember now, this is going to be good action. This is what's going to, if you're wise, if you're meditating, if you're in touch, you are going to then naturally perform good action towards other people. So do not take the life of any living creature. And yes, that includes the ants and roaches that I kill in my house. So it's a tough one, right? Do not take anything that is not freely given to you. Abstain from sexual misconduct and sexual overindulgence, untrue, deceitful speech, and avoid intoxicants. Pretty simple code of conduct, right? You see that they don't say, you have to completely, do this, 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 and this, and this, and this, and this. They're not giving you this whole boatload of things, but basically some overriding principles of the way that you live. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Tibetan Buddhists, okay? So what happened is that this particular branch of Buddhism, they began to believe that they had leaders of their monasteries that were called bodhisattvas. And these bodhisattvas were people who actually had achieved enlightenment, but they made a conscious choice to be reborn again so that they could come back and they could be model citizens to teach other Buddhists how to be better Buddhists and how to achieve enlightenment on their own. So they're going to postpone their nirvana, and it's all out of selflessness, because think about what we just heard, right? That I am going to postpone my cessation of all suffering, and I'm going to postpone that because I want you to learn how to live this and become enlightened and achieve nirvana. So it's very self-sacrificial in the sense that I have this willingness to continue to go through this life cycle and suffer, and I'm doing it at your behest. And so these leaders, the bodhisattvas, they became known as lamas. And so what ends up happening is the Tibetan Buddhist monasteries, their leaders became known as the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama is not a person, it is a title. And the Dalai Lama that we have now, I want to say is the 14th, I think he's the 14th Dalai Lama. I'm pretty sure. Don't hold me to that. But what happened is when politics and religion clash, so the Tibetan Buddhists were forced out of communist China in 1959, and so they are considered persona non grata, and they are living in their own monastic communities separate and apart from mainland China. And so we meet the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, who I'm sure you all are familiar with him and have probably heard him speak. Now, the way the story goes about how people know who the Dalai Lama is they would say that the Dalai Lama is identified at a young age and then taken from his family and brought into the monastery and then trained in the practices of the monastery. And the way that this Dalai Lama became identified was the Dalai Lama before him was either sick or already dead. I'm not 100% certain about that. And they had some of the Dalai Lama's toys and belongings, the former Dalai Lama. And so they set out and they were given guidance, kind of enlightenment as to where to go and where to search for the new Dalai Lama. And they were kind of out in the communities, the villages. And they come to a home and there's a young boy. And they showed the young boy some toys. And there were some toys that belonged to the Dalai Lama and some toys that were just kind of thrown in, and the little boy would point to the Dalai Lamas, and he would say, "That's mine," and he would point to the things that belonged, and he would say, "Those are mine, those are mine, those are mine," and he was correct in everything that he identified that literally actually belonged to the Dalai Lama. And so what they said was that he obviously was the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. He must have already been dead, or he couldn't have been the reincarnation. The reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, and that he recognized his former belongings, and they brought him to the monastery, raised him up, and this is who we meet today as the current Dalai Lama. Now, this Dalai Lama, he's really liberal. Some Buddhists really don't like him a whole bunch. You know how there are some Catholics who really don't like Francis very much? It's the same kind of a thing where they're like, he's just straying too far to the, because this Dalai Lama says it's not impossible that a woman could be identified as a Dalai Lama, even though there are Buddhist monks don't really come in the female gender. So it's almost this kind of thinking like we need to catch up with the modern world, and yes, there could be a woman that is enlightened as a man is. But he's really kind of an amazing historical, political, and religious figure in the world. So we're going to listen to a very short video from him. There's also subtitles because sometimes you can't understand, but he does a real short little synopsis. He talks a little bit about what it really means to live in peace and happiness. So let's watch that.
Ultimately, you see, thing is, we want happiness. We do not want suffering. Everybody, any sentient being. Now we are actually creating more unnecessary sufferings. I think very important to make clear to public. We are not talking about religion. If we have more compassion, God will please. We are not talking that. As a Buddhist, if we practice compassion, Buddha will support us. I'm not talking that. If we are a more compassionate person, I get more benefit. I will be more happier person. That's the point. Here, I think one check, one is because of $1 million. But here, no peace. That $1 million will not bring inner peace, happiness. More frustration. This money bring more frustration, more suspicion, more anxiety, or sometimes more jealous then. So inner peace is the ultimate source of happiness, joyfulness. So I think people do not understand that, isn't it? That's my point.
So interesting, right? This idea that like the things that we hold dear, the things that we hold tightly, it's like we're afraid to lose, and they can cause us more anxiety, right? And so that is in a nutshell. Really, he gives you kind of a nutshell of a way of thinking about what it means to really be happy. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of their sacred time, and then I'm going to show you another video which is really encapsulates the real heart of Buddhist thinking. So they really don't have a special day for worship. They can make their offerings to the Buddha anytime, any place. They can have their own temples. They can go to temples that they are gathered with other people. They may or may not. And basically what they do is they offer flowers and incense and candles, very much like the Hindu temples we looked at last week. And then you can see some of the things of what the significance of the offerings are called. And this practice is called puja. I'm not sure if we mentioned that last week in Hinduism. So this practice is called puja. And so you can see that each one of these things has a significance, very much like our kind of sacramental life. When we have these are the things that we use as sacramentals and why we use them, you can see that they're very significant in some similar ways. Meditation we already talked about. This is part of every branch of Buddhism. Do you know that there are some Buddhist ascetics that can meditate nonstop for 24 hours? And when I say that they can do that, they literally sit in one position and they never move from that position. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't stay in the same position for 30 seconds. They literally fold up and they meditate, and they are in such a deep trance that they really have transcended their bodies, and they're not associating their body with any form of physical pain or suffering. It's kind of fascinating. The other thing within the meditation, and this is also Hindu, there are certain sounds, and so the sound of Om is a very significant sound. And the reason that sound is so significant is because it's supposed to be the perfect sound of God, of the Godhead. But one of the things that happens when they do the Om, and that whole vibration that you're feeling, it's kind of a way of like connecting your energy and it's one of the things they do that will connect them. Now, they don't do the chanting the whole entire time they meditate. They might do it, they might not. There are all different ways of meditating. They do ring gongs. They'll use incense during meditation. But the sounds and the posture of meditation are usually kind of similar. So this is the other video I want to show you. So the reason I want to show you this is that we talked last week about mandalas when we were talking about some of the Hindu feasts, right? So some of the drawings that they do in chalk. And I was talking about how the Nazi symbol, that the Nazis hijacked that from artwork within ancient religions. Mandalas are also very important within Buddhism. Now, the interesting thing about this is this is a typical Buddhist practice, and it's a meditative practice. So what you're going to see them do is you're going to see them build a mandala out of sand. And you're going to see how intricately it's done and how rigorous the practice is. Like it's a rhythm that they get, and they do this to get into a meditative state, but it's much bigger than that. Because we'll watch it, and then we'll talk about what happens at the end as they do this. So this is actually, I think this is the Dalai Lama again. And I think he has an audience. People are watching him do this, if I'm not mistaken.
What the Dalai Lama was unable to do in Bodh Gaya, he performs here. Laying out the first lines of the sand mandala pattern. It will be a mathematically exact replica of the design used in India. The hall falls silent. Here, the Dalai Lama exercises his full role in leading prayers, teachings, and the creation of the mandala. What remains is the destruction of the mandala by the Dalai Lama. To show the impermanence of all things created, the sand of the mandala will be thrown into the Mur River, where it will flow out into the world as a blessing.
Realistic as Buddhism is going to get. I don't think that it's frequent. Yeah, they would have kept it up for a while so people could see it, and it'd be. But the whole kind of meditation action of building it, the meditation while they're building it, and then the whole undoing of it. So what did you think about the undoing of it? Those were all monks that you were watching. So the lay people would probably have been kind of an audience while this was happening and involved in the prayer that the Dalai Lama was offering, chanting, meditating while this was happening, and then they would have observed the mandala once it was done. That's why they put the plexiglass around it. Now, an everyday Buddhist who might live in Daytona Beach wouldn't necessarily be doing this kind of extensive ritual. But that's what that would that's kind of like a more ceremonial type probably the most ceremonial type of practice you would see within Buddhism.
But as you were saying last week, the commoner household, they make a mandala on the front.
Yes, on their stoops, yeah. Yeah, so it's not uncommon for people to have their own, but that extent of what you saw, that was very high-level ritualistic because it was the Dalai Lama. Yes, and monks.
My understanding is Buddhist monks, not a permanent lifestyle or vocational choice like Christian monks. We go in a monastery and generally will stay the rest of your life. My understanding was they go in for a period of time and come out and resume.
It could be transitional. You're probably right about that because I can't say that I know a whole bunch about the lifestyle. But I do know the saffron robes that they were wearing is a significant garb, so that's what kind of earmarks them as a monk, and that it is considered to be a celibate phase of their life, so it could be transitional very easily from what, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, did they? And it was made of sand? Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 So what do you think of the destruction of it? Well, what do you think the purpose is? Now that you know everything there is to know about Buddhism in 45 minutes. And so it is kind of similar. So what is it? What's the significance of it's not permanent. So they basically say, even this beauty, this thing that we spent all this time and all this energy and all this prayer creating, it's impermanent and it doesn't really mean anything at all. It can be swept away, and then it goes out and it becomes part of the greater world. That's why he took and he threw it in the river, because now it becomes part of the bigger. So it's basically this understanding of we are watching the cycle of life, right? We are involved in this creation from beginning to end, and it's no matter how beautiful it is and how majestic it is, it's all impermanent. And that's what Buddhism would tell you, that there's nothing that is permanent, and that's true. My husband used to say the most permanent thing in the world is change. He used to say that to me all the time. There's nothing more permanent than change.
And they always say, remember, you must die.
Yes, Yeah. It kind of invigorates you to take advantage of what you got going now, right? Yeah. And remember, all of life is suffering. I know some people who are Italian, that's their mantra, and they're not Buddhist. All of life is suffering, yes. So it's fascinating, isn't it? I just think it's kind of a...
When the monks are praying or meditating, are they praying for personal enlightenment or world enlightenment?
It's all about kind of separating yourself, allowing your mind to just be separated from the physicalness of your body. So you are trying to just open yourself up to separate yourself from the permanence of this body. That's why when I say some monks can sit and meditate for hours and hours and hours, and they can do it because they've gotten into such a state that they do not necessarily feel bodily pain. There are studies done with meditation, and like they do brain activity of meditation, and there are some studies that would say that if you are truly in a meditative state, it's almost like it's a different brain, different level of brain wave. I was going to say energy, but brain waves that you're using. Yeah. There's a lot of really interesting studies about meditation and about being quiet. Really fascinating studies about how healthy that is for people. We were actually talking at the superintendent's meeting with the superintendent of schools about should we do a kind of introduce silence into our regimented routine of silent prayer into our day of school to help kids with their level of anxieties that they're dealing with right now. Because there's scientific evidence. Uh-huh.
Because they have found that it helps kids to really
Calm down.
center
Yeah.
themselves, calm down.
Yeah.
And it has had major effects in those.
Yeah. So now in Christianity, we have a practice known as centering prayer. Have you guys ever done centering prayer? Do you? Yes, so centering prayer, you have a mantra or a word, right? That it's your own, you design it in your own self, and you repeat it to yourself, not out loud. You repeat it, and the idea is that you say your centering word or your mantra until your mind just kind of floats away. And then if you start to get distracted, like in other words, if you're like kind of calm and and then you say, oh, I got to pay my bills when I get home, then you're supposed to start doing your mantra again. And that's supposed to center you. That's why it's called centering prayer. It's very much like Buddhist meditation. Meditation, whether it's guided or quiet or whatever, it's very sound practice for it can bring deep spiritual transformation to people.
Actually, I was just going to say that Buddhism and Zen Buddhism was brought by the Catholics, was brought by the Roman Catholic monks. That's where I first learned about it, the Roman Catholic.
Yep.
Because it's that meditation prayer.
There's lots of, yep.
It really has served Catholicism as well.
Yes. Every religious tradition can benefit from it. It's really quite beautiful. And people who don't affiliate with religion often meditate. Yeah. And counselors will tell people to meditate, and it's a very healthy practice. And the breathing it's very scientific. It's not like they're just saying, well, this makes you feel good, but when you breathe in through your nose and you breathe out through your mouth, that does some physical good for you. It opens up your airways, it changes your chemistry, it calms you down. So there's really valid, obviously, the things that have withstood the test of time that make people feel healthier, of course, they're going to be connected to religious traditions because religious traditions have practices that have withstood the test of time and in their perfect use of them have made people feel more connected and more healthy, right? When you're practicing religion in a healthy way. So it makes sense. Okay, so the last little bit here, they do have a couple special days. The Saka or Buddha Day, this is considered the most important day of the year. It's on the full moon day in May. And this might be a time when they do something like the very elaborate kind of ritualistic thing that we saw. And the death rituals are also significant. They do funeral pyres. So temples, a lot of times Buddhist temples are attached to Buddhist monasteries. It's not uncommon that there are Buddhist monasteries that have a number of practitioners. We already talked about the stupas, and you might see larger ones, and sometimes those are referred to as pagodas. So those are just the buildings associated with the religious practices. And that's it. We got any questions? Any last comments?
I just want to say one thing about, for the novice, there is a fabulous novel by Hermann Hesse called Siddhartha. And it's a very interesting novel about the life of Siddhartha, Buddha. But even young people, teenagers, read it in school. I mean, maybe not here they don't, but there are curriculums which include this novel, which is very easy reading and very interesting.
Because he is such an important historical figure.
Well, because yes, and because it talks about life is not, going to the mall.
Oh, right. So they're trying to get to the philosophy of Buddhism within it. Yes.
Easy philosophy.
Yeah.
And it's specifically for materialists.
Yeah. Maybe I'll make my kids read that next semester.
I know English teachers.
I don't think I've read it, so I'll have to.
It's Hermann Hesse.
Hermann Hesse. Okay.
HSSE.
Okay.
German, now dead.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's used as curriculum
Yeah.
for high schools. And it's really good.
Anything else? Anything online? Okay, good. Well, thank you all. This has been very enjoyable. I'll probably see you sometime next semester. Does anybody have anything that they want to use as a religious education curriculum for next semester? Anything that you've been thinking about, you're interested in? On what it is? Death and dying? Ooh, I could teach death and dying. That'd be fun.
From the different religions, because when we go into the home at a death, if it's a different religion than we're used to, we have all the protocols, but you still just sit there and you ask the family, what do you want me to do? And it's very, very humbling and moving.
Okay.
Thank you very much. That was brilliant.
Well, I don't know about brilliant, but it was my pleasure. So it's a very skim the surface, but a little nice little compilation gives you a taste for something you might want to dig deeper into. You going to stay Catholic, or did you pick a different religion now?
I was dumb and happy before. Now
I'm flabbergasted and wandering.
I don't know what's going on.
Here's what's going on. There's one God by many different names. Amen. Thanks, everybody. It's been a pleasure. You guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a blessed Advent and Christmas.